Well, it was on March 3rd, 1989. It'll be a date that will be in my memory forever. A man came into my home, came up from behind me, um, grabbed me, took me out to the woods behind my house where he robbed and repeatedly raped me.
When it sunk into me what had happened, I was in a state of shock. I'm a police officer. Crimes don't happen to police officers. We protect other people from crimes, and yet here, my own wife was taken out of my own home under my very nose, and it was a shock.
The only thing that I wanted to do was to take a shower. I wanted to try to wash everything away. I wasn't interested in preserving evidence.
I felt guilty not only as a police officer not protecting my wife, but I felt guilty that I put her through the evidence collection part. And I knew it was the right thing to do, but it didn't make it any easier to have to put her through that aspect of it.
I'm taken to a room where I then have 3 different nurses and a doctor coming at me with questions because each of them are trying to get a little bit different information for the part of my case that they're working on. And I remember that, they'd come in and out, and I kept thinking, they don't believe me. In my mind's eye, they were going outside. One would come in and ask me a question. They were going outside and telling, the others the answer, and then say, okay, you go in and ask her this and see if she comes up with the same answer. Ask her this way. And I mean, that's not what they were doing, but that was the impression I got, and I thought, nobody believes me. I'd never heard of the SANE program until several years after I had been raped. A scientist from our lab came up to me and asked me would I be interested in speaking to a class of SANE nurses. And I said, well, what is that? And she explained to me that's a sexual assault nurse examiner who works one-on-one with a rape victim. And I said, absolutely. I said, and how do you get this program started?
A SANE nurse is a sexual assault nurse examiner, and that's a nurse who's specially trained in conducting a sexual assault exam. The training includes not only where to look for evidence, how to collect evidence, but how to interview a victim properly so that you are able to collect the evidence you need. The SANE nurse works as a part of the Sexual Assault Response Team, or the SART team. Basic members of the SART team are the SANE nurse, the advocate, the law enforcement officer, the prosecutor, and the crime lab specialist. So the next thing I'm going to do is have you get undressed so I can collect the rest of the evidence. So here's a robe. Most advocates know that victims can come in and have an exam for up to 72 hours, but they don't realize that the longer they wait, the less evidence that we can collect. The evidence that we're able to collect is lost dramatically within the first 5 to 12 hours after an assault. So it's real important for advocates to know that even though, yes, we can do an exam, and we'll do an exam up to 72 hours, the sooner the victim gets in, the more likelihood we will have of getting positive results. What we're going to do today is we're going to primarily focus on your role as a part of the sexual assault response team. We're going to talk about...
You really have to be clear on what the protocols are in terms of what the advocate does, what the SANE nurse does, what the police do, so that you can better serve the victim.
In the emergency room, we now have a responsibility to let victims know that even though we don't know who the assailant is now, if we are able to collect his body fluids and they're able to identify his DNA, that'll be able to put in the data bank, and it might be years later that they'll identify who it was.
We have nurses from SARS come into our training program and give a 2 or 3 hour training so that people have an idea of where to stand when the exam's going on, what's going to happen, those sorts of things.
What is done with the DNA evidence if it doesn't match? Does it stay within the indexing system?
If we as advocates want to be able to let the victim survivors know what's going to happen if they choose option A over option B, we better know what's going to happen. And so having that open dialogue between the police, the victim advocates, the SANE nurses, etc., really facilitates our being able to understand the process. And that's really our job as advocates, is understanding it so we can communicate it to victim survivors.
You want some more? The lives that they touch reaches much further than just that victim that they see. Because if they can help that victim on her road to recovery, then you have a victim who goes home and takes that to everybody around her.
Mama.
What, honey?
Choo-choo.
You're welcome.
It was January 18th, 1994. I had just come home from work, and I opened the front door, and the rapist immediately began hitting me in the head with a hard object. My physical condition after the rape was pretty bad. I mean, he beat me severely. I knew that I needed medical attention for those wounds, but also I knew that I needed medical attention because I had been raped. I knew that they needed to collect evidence so that I could get the bad guy. The first responder, he asked me to tell him what happened. And so I described to him very briefly what had happened, not going into a lot of detail. I remember there were parts of my rape that I didn't have vocabulary for. You know, I didn't know that people did things like that. So how are you supposed to describe it to somebody if you have never experienced before, or even imagine it before? How can you find the words to describe it? And so the credibility of the victim comes into play because they didn't tell all of that right then. But it should be expected. It's going to take time for that crisis moment to kind of settle, for them to find it in themselves to be able to say it.
Not collecting certain things such as anal swabs, oral swabs, could prove detrimental to a case if those areas were penetrated and there might be viable DNA evidence present there, because those will be lost because you only have one shot to collect the evidence that you need.
What we will typically do is our law enforcement officer, our street cops, will take a real brief initial history from the victim. Then we'll talk with them in more detail, and we'll give that information to the law enforcement officer. Okay, I'm going to start by asking a few questions about what happened. The victims are often much more willing to tell us things they might have been hesitant to tell the cops. So if you could start by telling me what happened when you first met the man.
I was able to go into a lot of detail with her because I had told the story 3 or 4 times now. It was getting a bit easier. My boyfriend was with me. I felt like I had somebody there to watch over me. And so I was able to tell her pretty much all of the different ways that he had penetrated me so that they would be able to find all of the evidence that they needed. I expected everything to go over to the crime lab or wherever your evidence goes, and it was all going to be processed and going to be solved within a week.
Okay, the first room we're going to go into is actually, it's referred to as an evidence examination room.
I think education is very important to the role that we play here as crime laboratory analysts. These processes don't occur like they do on TV, that they don't occur within, a 40-minute window with commercials, and that some of these processes take anywhere from a couple of hours to work to a 2-day process. And there are as many as 10 or so processes in any given DNA case that evidence must go through.
And when I spray it, any areas that have semen on the panties, like I said, were transferred over here. And actually, as it's coming up like this, I typically would take my pencil and circle the areas that come up first.
I think proper education through victim advocates will assist victims in understanding the processes that we go through with the evidence that's been collected by the nurse at the time of the rape exam.
It's called a capillary.
Knowledge is power. And if you empower your victims with the knowledge that you have, they can better understand what's going on and not be so frustrated when the system's not working the way that they want it to. They'll understand why.
In the database, both at the state level and at the national level, are known convicted offender samples, which are part of the CODIS system, the Combined DNA Index system, as well as unknown profiles that are developed from cases worked by state and local laboratories around the United States. So a local laboratory, through their state DNA index system, is capable of then searching the entire country for not only against known offender profiles, but also unknown offender profiles that have been developed in casework. So not only can we link cases to each other, but we can link cases to suspects. If there is no known suspect in the case, that search may take anywhere from weeks to months to years in order to find the individual who is responsible for committing the crime.
If you have a violent crime that's been committed, you want to find the person and get them off the street as quickly as possible. And until you get the samples run and get the results, that individual may still be on the street, and they may still be on the street committing additional crimes, and no one wants that to happen.
Sunday night down in Virginia Beach, Virginia Beach police officer came to the door and knocked on the door.
And he says, well, I come to tell you that your daughter had been in an accident. So we said, okay, where is she so we can go pick her up? And he said, no, ma'am, your daughter has been murdered. And we both, my husband and I both went into shock.
They were interested in who she knew, who her closest friends were, and we were giving them names and phone numbers. Initially, they arrested a guy who she had dated a couple of times. I was convinced in my own mind that this was the guy. I was elated that we got this guy, and got him off the street. After the forensic and the physical evidence didn't match up, I was really disappointed and discouraged.
A person who's in the victim witness area should have a plan of action, a strategy, because now you just dumped in somebody's lap that the person that they thought did it is not the person. What plan of action? Where do we go from here? Tell me something that you're doing. Don't give me, well, I'm sorry, the DNA just let somebody go. Yeah, what's the rest of the sentence here?
It's much better to have the police call you more frequently than they need to, and tell you, hey, we're still working on this. We don't have anything new to tell you, but we just wanted to call and let you know that we're still working on it. And that's very reassuring. Made me feel very comfortable that these guys, it changed my attitude that they were seriously working this case.
We were a close-knit family. My sister Norma was the baby of the group. She had a voice from heaven. When she was growing up, she sang in the choir. She was the mother of 3 children. She had a girl and 2 boys. She went out to catch the bus, which was about 2 blocks from the house that she was visiting. And from there, we're not quite sure what happened. I believe it was November 2nd. A call came in that a body had been found. Evidence was preserved as good as it possibly could be preserved. They did all kinds of the DNA testing and things like that and preserved what they had. And then from 1996 to 2001, there was nothing. And in December of 2001, I got a phone call from the detective that was on my sister's now cold case. And we'd had a CODIS hit on someone who was in jail. There's excellent matching, medium matching, and then a poor match for DNA results, and my sister's was an excellent match. The entire case fell into place as far as I was concerned, but you have to step back from the mystery and the magic of DNA and realize that you still have a jury system in place. And so you have to have those 12 people that are sitting there, hopefully absorbing all of that information that's being thrown at them. And just the testimony on DNA can be very, very confusing. And in my sister's case, the verdict was an acquittal for this, for the defendant in her case, meaning that he was found not guilty. We just wish we could have gotten a better verdict out of it.
I think that the introduction of DNA evidence in sexual assault prosecutions on Indian reservations had a significant impact in that it caused a lot of people to plead guilty, I believe. Processing of DNA evidence in Indian country is handled primarily by the FBI. Initially, they were very responsive to Indian country, but as their caseload grew, they began to be slower in their response to Indian country. Several years ago, the director of the FBI was made aware of this, and he allocated separate lab analysts within the FBI laboratory to handle Indian country cases, so that we had, in effect, our own mini laboratory within the FBI to handle DNA and Indian country cases, and that has been instrumental in providing quick responses to DNA analysis and getting these cases to progress quickly. Child sexual assault cases are very difficult because initially defendants automatically attack the credibility of the child. The child is lying. What DNA evidence has allowed us to do is put an almost complete stop to that. DNA evidence is conclusive. It saved a lot of children from having to testify.
In September of 1999, we issued here in Milwaukee County our first John Doe DNA warrant, and it was a case that was a sexual assault case from 1993. The statute was about to expire in October of 1999, so in September of 1999, just a few weeks before the expiration, we issued a case against the DNA profile of the assailant, based upon the evidence that we got from the semen from the vaginal swabs of the victim.
I did obtain 15 warrants from Norm Gahn, the DA in Milwaukee County, and those 15 warrants encompass 24 cases, of which 14 of those victims were juveniles who could not identify the suspects that had assaulted them.
It was very interesting when we started issuing our John Doe warrants and when we started contacting the victims after so many years.
I was 15 years old and pretty much was pulled off of a bus stop on my way home from work on a real wintry night. I had been doing a series of lineups over the years, and then it got to a point where I hadn't heard anything. And then out of the blue, I get this call.
I've been a victim advocate for 24 years. DNA has changed my work. I really, really have struggled with meeting people 6-7 years after the crime for the first time, where no services were offered, where they had multiple questions that were not answered, and they didn't know who to turn to for answers.
I had never really dealt with it. It was just kind of like pushed to the back. So then it was just like, okay, now I have to deal with this.
I always say that they always go like this with their hand, and what their meaning is, it's back there, and I'm asking them to bring it forward again.
I didn't receive any type of counseling, any advocate. What got me through is my religion, my family.
So we sat down with lots of the sexual assault service providers in Milwaukee to establish a protocol that would change that, and that we would make sure that a victim of sexual assault would be linked up with a victim advocate at a much earlier stage.
Okay, well that's good. That's good.
The detective on the case now contacts one of the advocates from my unit in the district attorney's office and tells them we have a foreign profile, and then actually asks the victim to come in to meet with the advocate and a district attorney.
We got a hit out of the data bank, or we connected, what, 2 cases through the data bank? We review the case at the district attorney's office. Identify critical witnesses that you may need down the road. Keep track of them now. Order the 911 tape now. Make sure that the photographs have been developed. Make sure that all the paperwork is in place. Take a look and see if we have the crime scene photos on both these cases. Make that note. Because you are scrambling oftentimes 6 or 7, 8 years later to go back and recapture that evidence.
A lot of victims are interested in knowing what piece of evidence, whether it be a vaginal swab, semen on a piece of their clothing, a swab from their mouth that actually linked that perpetrator in the data bank to their assault. We can say to them, you going through that exam or you going through that really, really difficult interview helped us get to where we are today.
As convicted offender data banks grow and grow and get larger and larger, as more states expand the qualifying offenses to take DNA standards from convicted offenders, the chances of that profile becoming a quote hit just get better and better and better.
To say that DNA is important would be an understatement. It gave our family our lives back.
If we're going to place the victim through the indignity of the sexual assault exam, and then just take the evidence and put it in a police inventory room is unacceptable. That is wrong, and it should not be done.
It's not just a kid, it's a life. Lives are held within those little white boxes.
About 3 years after the rape, they were running the samples, put them into the database, and the computer was doing its work, and there was a cold hit. He was given a 22-year concurrent sentence. It was final, it was done. So I could breathe again. When I left, I could breathe again.
In my sister's case, the verdict certainly was not what we wanted, but to have had the DNA testing come through and to have the police department and the prosecutor's office in Kansas City do the job that they did, we took solace from that.
I think that was the most joyous day in 3 or 4 years that when they called us and said that they had made a match.
DNA was 100% the reason why Shermaine Johnson was arrested, convicted, and sentenced. My sweet hope wasn't here, but this person will not hurt another person.
It is very satisfying in a case like Tawana's case where the suspect was identified, he is in prison, and that she has gone on with her life, and because she deserves to have that justice.
Hey, what you doing?
It was like I would say a awakening. Something that was dead within me had been released.